Well, good morning and welcome to this dialogue on the transition to nature positive in business. What more needs to be done? I'm Guy Duke and I'm Project Director for We Value Nature. The purpose of this dialogue is to take stock of the changing operational landscape for the transition to nature positive in business and assess what more needs to be done to accelerate this transition, in particular here in Europe. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers today, including representatives from EU bodies, from key initiatives in this space, from business, and from finance. Before we go any further, I'll just run through a few quick house rules. The meeting is being recorded, so if you don't want to be included, please send a message in the chat or keep your camera off and microphone muted. You can still ask questions in the chat and we'll read these out during the Q&A and panel sessions as far as we have the time to do so. Please do put your name and organization and what you're hoping to learn today in the chat. We'd be very happy to know who's with us. And please ensure you are on mute and your camera is off unless you are taking part in the Q&A discussions. Our speakers will be monitoring the chat, so if you do have any questions, please post them there. During the Q&A, you'll be invited to either put a question in the chat or raise your hand to unmute and ask a question. We'll be using Menti today, so if you have a smartphone or tablet, please keep it close and use it to access the Menti questions. Otherwise, you'll be able to use your laptop or computer browser. We have an arresting program for today. If you could just put that up again, thank you. And we start with a session to set the scene, followed by a panel discussion where we'll be looking to bring you, the audience, into the debate. And finally, a session with our speakers from the European Commission and the European Investment Bank. So without further ado, I'll hand over now to Martin Locke, who is the Deputy Executive Director of the Capitals Coalition, to moderate our opening session on setting the scene. Over to you, Martin.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Guy, for the introduction and setting the scene. My name is Martin Locke, Executive Director at the Capitals Coalition. You're probably all aware, but for those that are not, we are the global coalition that came together around the joint ambition to transform the way our decisions are made by including natural capital as well as social, human and produced capitals. So that's who we are. And our organization stood at the beginning of We Value Nature, the wonderful campaign that we are now closing down with this meeting and a few of the following steps after that. We have helped to establish this campaign, and we are very proud that it's delivered by many coalition organizations, some of them joining us today in this call. We Value Nature will leave behind a wonderful legacy that will come to the Capitals community, and that is a starting point for us to further deliver what's needed to transform the way our decisions are made. So the journey of We Value Nature started 3.5 years ago. And although that sounds just a short time, the landscape has been changing dramatically over the last 3.5 years. So back in 2018, we were not called the Capitals Coalition, but the Natural Capital Coalition. We produced the protocol, Natural Capital Protocol, in 2016. And since then, in 2018 and the years after that, we saw many additional guidances, a finance sector guide, biodiversity guidance, an integrated capitals assessments document on the principles. And also we established ourselves as a Capitals Coalition, bringing together the 4 capitals in one new legal entity based in the Netherlands. But it's not only that we changed and that we started to further develop guidances, but also the landscape around us really changed. So what we've seen over the last years is a huge uptake of the importance, the urgency to embed the value of nature and natural capital into decision-making by the G7, by the World Bank Group, by the OECD, World Economic Forum and the European Union that also founded this wonderful campaign. So the underpinning role of natural capital is quite clear, for example, in the EU Green Deal, and also the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset. They are pushing for has capitals thinking as the backbone of its concept. At the UN level, we saw a major step forward by having nature-based solutions as a key issue, for example, enshrined in the UNFCCC agenda, and also the nature negotiations led by the CBD have seen natural capital accounting now in the heart embedded of the global biodiversity framework that is in the making. And what we've seen into the context of these negotiations for both climate as well as for biodiversity is business organizations and civil society organizations coming together to put their shoulders jointly behind a nature positive objective that can be the twin objective to becoming carbon neutral in the climate space. A mission for nature positive that only can be operationalized when we are making impacts and dependencies on natural capital visible. So you see a huge uptake. What we also have seen the last 3.5 years is an emergence of groupings of partners collaborating to jointly standardize the way how we account for value. And so we all know the examples: Value Balancing Alliance, Science-Based Target Network, the International Sustainability Standards Board, TNFD, all now firmly rooted in the landscape around us. Of course, this doesn't mean that there haven't also been more dramatic changes in the landscape around us. Dramatic reality checks on what is really important for people and for society. So we've seen life taking, literally, unfortunately, events taking place, sometimes ignited by climate change, the fires, the floods that we've seen, sometimes by health issues, COVID-19, or by war and safety issues in the Ukraine. And all these crises show an enormous impact on people's safety, health, and well-being. And in all cases, there's also clear signals that our most precious dependencies can be at stake. Of course, a capitals approach has been also developed through We Value Nature. By itself will not be the silver bullet to tackle these kind of crises, but it's clear that a greater awareness on the dependencies and the impact will help to find systemic solutions that are needed to combat all these different crises that I just mentioned. And for one thing, we see this quite clearly in the context of the green recovery strategies. With that, I would close these introductions on the shifting landscape, and I'm looking forward to the discussions today. So, Guy, back to you.
Many thanks, Martin. And I'd like to hand over now the microphone to Renata Pollini, who is Head of Nature at Holcim. And Renata also sits on a working group for the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And we've asked Renata to give us something of an update on that key initiative, which of course is very pertinent to moving towards nature positive. So over to you, Renata.
Thank you, Guy. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. As Guy mentioned, I'm Renata Pollini. I'm the head of nature for Holcim. And for those who do not know, Holcim is a global leader in innovative and sustainable building solutions. And also, as Guy said, I'm also part of, I'm a member, in fact, of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, the so-called TNFD. And today I'm going to talk more about this key initiative, because we have this main question, no? What else needs to be done? And I would say many things, but focus on the tnfd. What we are noticing is that market players are increasingly seeing the commercial imperative for managing their nature-related risks and opportunities, but they lack the information they need to do so. And the tnfd will help closing this gap. So the mission of the tnfd is to develop and deliver a risk management and disclosure framework for organizations to report and act on evolving nature-related risks, which aims to support a shift in global financial flows from a nature negative outcomes towards a nature positive outcomes. So all in all, the tnfd will help companies in the financial sector to factor in nature into financial and business decisions. So companies, they will be able to factor not only nature risks, but also opportunities using a scientific approach in a robust and consistent way. It's important to mention these opportunities because everything we are doing at tnfd is based on the learnings of TCFD. TNFD, if you want to know, is like a cousin of the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate related financial disclosures. So we are really, we learn with this, and we are making a lot of emphasis on the opportunity as well. So risks, but also opportunities. So I think it's important, the approach we are taking at TNFD, we are calling this open innovation approach, which means that we are inviting feedback and opportunities to pilot beta versions of the framework. In this way, we are bringing market players in an early stage to the process. So where we are at, we started the work in October last year, and 3 weeks ago, more precisely on March 15, we released the first beta framework. We are now getting the feedback from the market, and at the same time, we are working in different work groups to develop further the framework. And in June, the plan is to launch an updated version of this beta framework. The final version is planned to be out there in late 2023, but we want to ensure that when this day arrives, the TNFD framework, we have benefited from different inputs from the markets, and therefore we are going to ensure that the guidance is relevant and also implementable by companies and also the financial sectors. So in more details of this first beta release, we are seeking for feedback in mainly 3 things. The first thing is on the fundamentals for understanding nature. I think if we would ask everybody in this call the meaning of nature, what does nature mean, we would get different answers. And that's why maybe most of the people would mention biodiversity is equal nature. But in fact, it's more than that. Nature encompasses many elements. We could say that encompass fresh water, encompass ocean, land, and also the atmosphere. So the air is included on the nature. So in this first beta framework, we are seeking for feedback on the definitions of nature. So the fundamentals for understanding nature, that's one point. The second point is that we are seeking feedback on the draft disclosure recommendations. So we basically took the same approach of this TCFD. We didn't change anything. So basically on that space, so basically we are asking disclosure on the governance, the strategy, risk management, and also metric and targets. We added a little bit more on the opportunities, but all in all, it's very similar to the TCFD. And then the third thing we are asking for this beta framework feedback is on the LEAP, we are calling LEAP process for nature-related risks and opportunity assessment. This is a new approach we developed. LEAP means locate, evaluate, locate, evaluate, assess, and prepare. So we are also asking feedback on that. The approach is to help companies. It's a very pragmatic way to help corporate to assess the impacts and dependence on nature. So I think that's it from my side. We would like to have everybody that has interest to give us feedback. Just go to the website. The framework is there. And also, if you are more willing to pilot, that would be very good. We're really looking forward to receive your feedback. And that's it.
Very many thanks for that, Renata. And it's really great to have you with us and to have this inside view on what's going on with TNFD and where it is at the moment, and what input is needed from our community. So I hope participants around this meeting will be keen to pick that up and go and provide some feedback. We'll move on then to another really important initiative that's been going on for a couple of years now, Business for Nature. And we have a speaker who's closely involved in Business for Nature, Melissa Meiners from Unilever. Melissa is the Global Sustainability Manager at Unilever and has been closely involved with Business for Nature. So over to you, Melissa. Thanks very much for joining us.
Hi everyone. Yes, so I'm here to talk about Business for Nature, but just very quickly on Unilever. So we have many nature targets, and obviously the kind of broader policy certainty is very important for us, which is why Business for Nature is important for us. And last year we announced a new 10-year sustainability plan, our compass targets. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because we used to have a separate business strategy and a separate sustainability strategy, and now that they're together. So it really kind of shows how business is shifting to value nature. And as I've mentioned, we've been a member of Business for Nature from the start. So Business for Nature is a global coalition that brings together business and conservation organisations and forward-thinking companies, and now has more than 70 international partners and companies of all sizes. And Business for Nature did an amazing job at the open-ended working groups in Geneva at pushing the business voice. And I think someone previously mentioned that hadn't happened at previous COP negotiations, and they really organised themselves around some key advocacy asks to influence the global biodiversity framework. And I'll come on to the 3 points that Business for Nature was driving in Geneva, but overall the coalition remains concerned about the overall ambition of the global biodiversity framework, and it was very much about consulting with the businesses involved in Business for Nature and really honing in on kind of the key advocacy asks where the coalition believes that we could drive change. The 3 points that we were driving there, and this was through interventions during the negotiations and also bilateral meetings with governments. But the first point was to adopt a clear and simple rallying mission to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. And as I mentioned, the real concern around the proposed mission in draft 1 not having the urgency and clarity that's needed. I mean, when we have these conversations internally, and I share the global biodiversity framework with people not involved in this process, they're just like, well, so what? How does that actually translate into business action? The second point was around target 15, which is mandatory reporting for businesses on biodiversity impact. And internally at Unilever, we often say biodiversity risk is the new ESG elephant in the room, and we're not ready for this. And even as kind of a progressive business working on nature targets, we've realised we really need to hone in and look at this in a different way, and emerging tools will help. So one of those is tnfd that Renata explained, and another one is the Science-Based Targets Network, who are developing science-based targets for nature. So Business for Nature and other businesses are looking closely at this. And the third point that Business for Nature were making at the open-ended working group in Geneva were raised the ambition on target 18, which is around subsidies and repurposing subsidies. So there's research that was published in February that showed that at least 1.8 trillion of subsidies are kind of flowing in the wrong direction, and there's really a role for businesses and governments to come together to talk about how to repurpose and eliminate these subsidies. And some of the bilateral meetings led to kind of conversations around, okay, great, well, show us how, show us examples. So Business for Nature is going to be looking at this more closely in the future months. And I think there's a real kind of tangible opportunity for businesses to look at this a bit closer and look at kind of the transparency around subsidies and how how we drive further action. So I've seen kind of some messages pop up in the chat about kind of how we join Business for Nature, and I can send around an email afterwards, because there's I'm sure further kind of members would be very welcome, and I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Great to get that insight and to hear what's been going on in Geneva over the last 2-3 weeks, and great to have such a high-profile and large group of businesses pushing forward on global biodiversity targets. And as you say, that's something new. I've certainly sat through Subster and COP meetings in the past myself, and there's been a very small business presence. So it's great to have business now pushing in this direction. So I'd like to now take us forward and give some overview of what thinking we have been carrying forward within We Value Nature on what needs to happen next to accelerate the transition. So over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to focus on this, and then we'll move on to our panel discussion. So We Value Nature, Martin made a few comments on the project, on the campaign at the outset, but for those of you who are not so familiar with us, we are an EU-funded campaign funded under Horizon 2020. We've been working over the last 3.5 years to accelerate business uptake of natural capital assessment and accounting and of nature-based solutions. And we see these approaches as critical in enabling businesses to move from commitment to action. We see a lot of commitment coming in from businesses, but the real challenge is to move to action. And in accelerating the transition to nature positive, in support of the European Green Deal and of global biodiversity, climate and sustainability targets. And while many businesses have made considerable progress in regard to integration of natural capital in their decision making, these businesses do remain the tip of the iceberg. And We Value Nature has focused very much on the submerged part of the iceberg, the great majority of businesses who have not started their natural capital journey. And we've been focusing on helping more businesses get on what we call the uptake pathway and move towards a first natural capital assessment. And we've done this through concentrating our efforts on developing, delivering, and disseminating training, capacity building, and related resources, and events such as our 10-day challenge around a year ago, which saw over 40 events crammed into the space of a couple of weeks with a wide range of partners and businesses engaging. We've seen, particularly over the last year or so, a really rapidly growing interest and uptake of our training materials and other resources. And nature is finally beginning to attract levels of attention it deserves in business and finance circles. While a wide range of related projects and initiatives, both EU funded and global, address this space, as we heard at the outset, the end of We Value Nature at the end of this month will leave something of a key gap in providing the necessary coordination support across the EU to accelerate the necessary transition. The great majority of businesses, in particular SMEs, have yet to start their natural capital journey. So there remains an urgent need to provide support, in particular through expanded training and capacity building. In this respect, investment likely to deliver high return in terms of business transition to nature positive includes 4 or 5 key areas of investment. First, we need substantial scaling of cross-sector training and capacity building efforts, working with local partners across Europe, focused on raising awareness and understanding among what we might call the follower businesses, as opposed to the front runners, thereby helping many more businesses to progress to a first natural capital assessment. Second, we need to extend training capacity building to address barriers at more advanced stages of the uptake pathway. For example, adding more advanced training modules and other resources and curating communities of practice to support business to move to full integration of natural capital in business reporting, disclosure, strategy, and operations. Third, we need to extend tailored training and capacity building for key sectors with high impacts and dependencies on nature. That includes the finance sector, food and beverage, infrastructure, and the built environment, among others. And we need to include in this a supply chain approach to reach a higher proportion of businesses in these key sectors. And fourth, we need to extend training capacity building from a focus on natural capital to a multi-capitals approach, addressing also social and human capital. Beyond this critical need to scale training and capacity building, there are several other critical needs to accelerate the transition, and some of our speakers have touched on these already. First, developing the regulatory framework to provide a level playing field that requires businesses to become nature positive, involving accounting for impacts and dependencies, reporting and disclosure, and mechanisms to avoid, reduce, mitigate, and offset negative and cumulative impacts and deliver net positive for nature. Second, we need to nurture financial innovations to scale nature positive finance based on reliable natural capital data and practice. Third, we need to transform current incentive mechanisms, and Melissa has already highlighted this, by redirecting, repurposing, reforming, or eliminating all direct and indirect subsidies and incentives that are harmful to biodiversity. Fourth, we need to facilitate and incentivize the adoption and scaling of nature positive business models. There are very few such business models out there. We need to highlight where they are and nurture their emergence. Fifth, developing and demonstrating the use of robust data and information pathways that facilitate flows of information on natural capital and biodiversity to support the compilation of public and private sector natural capital accounts and will inform decision-making. And this will require much more coherence between what we're doing for data in the public sector and what we're trying to do in the private sector. And finally, we need to strengthen life cycle assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem service footprints for both products and organizations, integrating and further mainstreaming these with natural capital approaches and materiality assessment practices. So that's a lot to be done, a lot still to be done if we are to deliver on the European Green Deal. And the scale and time frame of investment, in particular of EU investment required to effectively accelerate the business transition to nature positive, is frankly well beyond that of a typical Horizon Europe coordination and support action of a few million euros of the nature of We Value Nature. If we're serious about attaining this transition to nature positive by 2030, the challenge to my mind, and I think to other colleagues in We Value Nature, is more on the scale of a Horizon Europe mission, that is the scale of 100 million euros or more. And this is a drop in the Horizon budget, but will go a long way to enabling this vital transition. Any such research and innovation funding needs to be partnered by significant debt and equity funding from the public and private sectors, including through blended funding instruments, to scale promising market-based innovation for nature positive. And I'm sure we'll touch on this in our remaining sessions this morning. So that's a feel for some of our thinking from We Value Nature on what needs to happen next. And I'll now hand over to Martin.
Thank you very much, Guy. And it is an impressive list of things to do that you shared with us. And it would be great to get reactions from both the audience as well as our panelists on these necessary next steps. But please let also not forget that the tip of the iceberg, as you called it, is already moving and implementing natural capital approaches to improve their decisions. And we shouldn't mistaken all of the actions needed to move the iceberg as a whole for being not able to do anything at this moment right now. So I want to start with the Mentimeter questions we have for you in the audience to pick your brains also on some of the issues we want to touch upon. So you have here a QR code, also the address online and the code 99185532. James kindly also put a link in the chat box that you can use immediately to get access. And the first question we have for you is, what barriers do you face for nature positive uptake? So probably the majority of the people here are at least interested in becoming nature positive and maybe also are already embarking on that journey. So what are the barriers that you face? And while people start bringing in their first reactions, maybe go back to Renata first. From Holcim, you told us about the TNFD and the beta framework you're involved with. But from Holcim's perspective, what would you say is the key barrier for a nature positive uptake? Please come in, Renata.
Yeah, sure. I think I would say the scientific measurement of nature positive. I think first of all, the definition, what does it mean, right? To me, to be nature positive. So we need a recognized definition for the term. And after it comes to the measurement. Do we have a scientific methodology to help us measure, they state we are today and they state that we are going to be in a few years to say we are positive, nature positive. I think that's it. I think that's the main barrier that we face. We luckily at Holcim, we do have a methodology to measure biodiversity impacts. It was developed with IUCN, and that we are very, very lucky to have this, but in many other industries, it's not there. So I think that's one of the key barriers for the business.
Thanks for that. And the clear definition of nature positive, as well as the measurement, science-based and standardized, are also some of the barriers that the audience is flagging. Bas Ruter from Rabobank, moving to you, to the finance sector. What do you see is the biggest barrier for a nature positive uptake in the finance sector?
I think, to be honest, the most important topic that we see with our clients is the fact that externalities are not yet priced in to the extent necessary. So if there is no pricing in of detrimental effects on nature, then there is no business model to actually make sure that sustainable production is being rewarded in the right way. And that's a general remark. But to be honest, in order to be able to show what those externalities are, we need to start measuring. So even though it's totally correct that we need to end up with business models that reward sustainable production, for now it's important that we actually make sure that these measurements are taking place. And That is also why we're active in TNFD, and that's also why we push for proper measurement within Business for Nature, because if we do not have that measurement in place, it will not work. And there is an important setback with regards to nature in comparison to climate, and that is the fact that it's a more complicated way of measuring. I mean, climate is the same throughout the world. It's 5 molecules. It's the same every time of the year. Nature is millions of species. I don't need to tell the details to this group probably. It's different in any place of the world, and it's even different between the seasons many times. So this is a massive thing to solve before we can actually start steering. So in the lead process of TNFD, start preparing to make those changes. So what we try to do in order to solve that is to actually take away some of those barriers by incentivizing the right behavior from within our own pricing systems and risk systems. And we also try to establish supply chain partnerships to actually make sure that the price that is being paid at the retail end is also being forwarded to or shipped back, if you want to, upstream to the farmers to actually get rewards for the right behavior.
Thanks for this, Bas. And the link between measuring impacts and dependencies with the externalities and the pricing incentives is a very clear one. Thank you for that. It also relates back to some of the points Melissa made in her introduction, reflecting on the CBD negotiations. So Melissa, could you come in on this and maybe add additional thoughts based on what Bas just shared with us on the link between measuring and the externalities and pricing throughout the supply chain? So from a perspective of Unilever, what you will see as the key barriers for this?
Yeah, so agree with all of Baz's points, but I think the thing for us is the sheer scale. We operate in 190 countries, and therefore there is not one common methodology, and all of our sourcing is indirect and sometimes very indirect. So through a supplier, a trader, through a larger farmer to a smallholder farmer. So we also have the issue of traceability, and it's something, it's kind of an ongoing challenge for us in particular through supply chains like palm oil and soy. And therefore, if we don't even have full traceability at the moment, which we're very much working on, you can't even get to the measurement point. So there's lots of issues around that, but there's been so much progress in the last few years, and which is why I mentioned SBTN and TNFD. You know, we need to kind of work with these bodies to strengthen them and help them understand kind of how this is implemented within a business and how the kind of measurement piece works within a business. So for example, it wouldn't be a scientist kind of implementing this, it would be a procurement person, therefore the language needs to speak to them. And so we're very much kind of interested in strengthening emerging methodologies so we can have one common methodology which would apply to the many different geographies that we work in.
Thanks, Renata. That touches upon a key issue raised by several of the people in the audience around standardized metrics and methods. One other point that popped up several times is regulation and the role of governments. So maybe Renata, could you reflect on this in the context of the barriers for becoming nature positive as Holcim? There's not one methodology, Melissa already said, but there's also maybe not one regulatory framework across the globe. Is that something that is stopping you to implement becoming nature positive as Holcim?
So the way that we see that Holcim sees is that we do believe business have an active role to play in providing solutions for nature. But in order to accelerate our actions, we need nature positive policies from governments, because look, we are big, like Holcim is a big company, Unilever as well, and so on and so forth. But in the world, our actions is limited. So if we want to have everybody working towards a nature positive future, we need nature positive policies. I think one struggle that maybe more these smaller companies have is also, if it's already difficult for big companies to assess, I can imagine for small companies as well. So I think one key thing that will be interesting, it's, I think Melissa touched on this point about redirect harmful subsidies to nature positive ones, including nature positive government incentives for business, and in particular for SMEs, so the small and medium enterprises. I think that would help a lot for us to move to a nature positive future in the world, right? Not only one business.
So thanks, Renata. And before diving into the policy question and what is needed a little bit further, let's first take a next step, next question on Menti. And what can you do yourself as a business person to become nature positive? So what's your next step? How are you going to go beyond the barriers that you're facing at this moment, just to get some ideas, reactions on what is already possible for you? So please use Menti again. Use your phone, your iPad, your computer to give your reactions on the next steps that you're going to set. And it's fascinating to see that the barriers were popping up a little bit faster than the next steps. So that's an interesting one, developing a training program across your business. Melissa, you touched upon also different people within your organization that need to be able to play their role. Can you say a little bit more on how Unilever is creating a training program across the business to embed the value of nature into all kinds of business decisions?
Yeah, so there are, as I mentioned right at the start, there's been this kind of decade shift. So 2010 to 2020, we had our Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. We've now got Compass goals, which are slightly different. So there's a whole load of kind of capability training around our sustainability compass goals. We've got 170,000 employees, so it's kind of a big cascade. But in terms of developing a training program, my mind goes more to our kind of codes, our implementation codes. So as I mentioned, all of our sourcing, our agricultural sourcing is indirect. Now we've sold our tea business, and that means we work through codes. We've got something called a Sustainable Agriculture Code, and we've got regenerative agriculture principles, which are coming on top of this. And that's kind of a big training piece, I guess, for farmers, and an implementation piece that we try and roll out with the hundreds of thousands of farmers that we work with globally. And the way that we develop those codes is in collaboration with partners and suppliers and farmer input. And there are kind of many tools and many kind of training programs. There's the We Value Nature one. There was something else from UNDP last year. So I think the resources are out there, and I think it's definitely a good idea to get people inspired by this. And I'm often very confused why people don't. My general impression is people kind of take longer to grasp nature positive than net zero, the carbon piece, and to me, I'm often confused by this. So because nature is so exciting and is so passionate, but so I think the training definitely helps, and bringing in external speakers as well, which there are many.
Thanks for sharing that experience, Melissa. And of course, the materials are there. We Value Nature, together with the Capitals Coalition and many others, launched a couple of weeks ago the first online course on measuring and valuing natural capital impacts and dependencies. It's on the Coursera platform. It's free for all who are interested to get that. And so we can put the link in the chat box on that, of course. A very rich course with loads of best practices, including from Unilever and Holcim and many others. So one of the other next steps was around investing in nature-based solutions. And this might be a good element to bring you in also, Bas. You already talked about the incentives that you're looking for as a bank. Are you also making it more interesting for your clients to invest in nature-based solutions? Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely, and I'd immediately want to respond also to to a remark made in the chat that 80% of the economy is made up by SMEs. So I think if we want to actually make a difference, then we also need to make sure that we provide solutions for smaller companies, like Melissa mentioned as well. We are very pragmatic, and we try to link the measurement of a good performance to a reward in order to stimulate the right behavior, so to speak. 5 elements, but very brief. We have been working with WWF and Friesland Campina, the dairy company, to set up a biodiversity monitor. And we use that system now to lower the price for borrowing money from the bank if you have a high performance. And that is also linked to a better price that is paid by the dairy company. So that is how we create incentives. We're looking at ways to export that to other countries, to export it to other sectors, including crop farming. So that is how we try to make it attractive to do the right thing. We have set up a totally new carbon bank that is actually paying for farmers to sequester carbon in the soil and helping large companies to actually compensate for their impossible, unavoidable carbon emissions, of course, focusing on lowering these emissions itself is possible. And we also work with public bodies and, for instance, UN Environment, Global Environment Facility in an investment vehicle that provides blended finance with a higher risk profile for companies to make the transition towards deforestation-free farming and sequestering carbon, so business models that include biodiversity. So we try to create incentives, rewards for people doing the right thing. And of course, we have ever evolving minimum standards for the businesses we no longer finance if there's not enough transition taking place in the right direction. So making it practical, measure it, rewarding it, and trying to organize the supply chain to jointly make sure that doing the right thing is actually also the most profitable thing for an entrepreneur, in specific, in our case, mostly farmers.
Okay, thanks for that. And also to the audience for the suggestions on next steps that you're taking. One of the next steps was to lobby with the Capitals Coalition to start working on the tourism sector. So this is something we are going to take on, especially in the African context, where we will start a case study with the tourism sector soon. And in a couple of weeks, we will get a new hub, the Caribbean region hub, that is also very interested to work with the tourism sector. As you can imagine, that is a key sector for a lot of the Caribbean countries. I propose that we go to the next question, which is on the institutional level change. So we already discussed the barriers and the next steps that people are planning to take, but in order to change at the organizational level, we of course need specific things to happen. So this Mentimeter question is, what is needed in your opinion, most urgently to accelerate the transition to nature positive? Is it management accounting to include natural and other capitals? Is it boards in your organizations to include nature-related competencies? Is it a shift towards stakeholder as opposed to shareholder focus? So bringing in all the stakeholders in decision-making processes. Is it nature-positive business models, developing these, or is it adopting a nature-positive purpose? So shifting from a finance purpose more towards becoming nature-positive as an institution or as an organization. So please start bringing in your reactions to this. And let's pause a moment to see how the different reactions are coming in. First, boards were on top. Now it's having the nature positive business models, nature positive purpose going hand in hand. So bringing in the fourth panelist now, Gerard Bos from IUCN. Nature-based solutions very much pushed by IUCN in collaboration and in their discussions with the business community. Can you reflect on how important it is to have a clear nature positive purpose as well as business models to build on? Please come in, Gerard.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. And so much has already been said this morning, and it's great to see, you know, this momentum really growing. Just to go back a little bit, 3-4 years ago when we started this project, institutional inertia was actually identified as a major barrier. But interestingly, this has really moved on. That means that the call for action by the business community to take this topic hard on, the fact that the finance community has really embarked in it, the fact that institutions such as the EU with the Green Deal, with the Green Taxonomy are really addressing the topic, has made people realize that they're not on their own in this journey. There are others out there wanting to address it and go about it. And really what we saw as the initial very important step was this capacity building and build the knowledge across the various functions within a company, but other organizations. And to a certain extent, where we haven't gotten yet is to get the boards really integrating the nature-related competencies. Now, we're not saying that that's the most important one, because why we've listed these 5 items is because we think it's a combination of all 5 that's probably required. But one element that was very important for us, and it was mentioned by others as well, is that the number of tools, guidelines, and frameworks is actually extraordinary. There are many out there. The issue is which one do you pick up and which ones fits for your culture in your organization or your company, and which ones fits with your current journey and maturity level in the company or in the organization. And that's a little bit what we've tried to do with We Value Nature, and will continue doing with the Capitals Coalition and any other organization, is to really help navigate this world of all these different tools and frameworks. And so if a nature positive purpose is really what needs to drive your organization, because you're not that profit related or profit orientated, then that's fine. However, if there's still a profit-making culture behind it, then we know that the ask from the management will be about a business model. What's going to be your business model? How are you going to generate the funds that will continue to make the organization thrive? And what I also found, which was quite interesting, is when we talk about barriers, when we talk about the next steps, we very often take a strong risk approach. And what I found interesting, and Bas started, venturing into this, nature, and Melissa mentioned it also, nature presents so many opportunities. And it's opportunities of investment where once you've actually done action on the ground, you see the change, and then you can share that with the stakeholders around you. So the shift towards stakeholders as opposed to a shareholder focus is actually getting them on the action. And we were a little bit critical to Business for Nature at the start when they called for action of the governance. So they wanted 1,000 companies calling the governments to action, the governments to action, and put an ambitious global biodiversity framework. I said, well, there's only way that you can call for action is if yourself, you're acting as well. But the great thing is that the companies that are here, some that are listening, are surely the ones that are already there. But Martin, you want to perhaps facilitate further and see how we received the answers from this.
Thanks, Gerard, for this, and also for pointing at the opportunities, not only on the risks. And so Melissa already spoke about this. Let's go to the agricultural sector and the finance sector. And Bas, I see your camera is already on. And how do you see that the finance sector can really push for the opportunities that are there to embed nature into decision making in a positive way? And what is needed for boards to include this into their work? Do they have the competencies for this, or is there something that we need to develop there? Please come in.
Yeah, you mentioned finance and agriculture, and that's of course at the heart of what we do every day. I just had a thought while you were asking. Yesterday, the IPCC report came out, and it said, well, in the top 3 of solutions is wind, solar, and carbon sequestration in agricultural soils. Now, understanding that wind and solar are already booming and are into mainstream, and this number 3 represent one of the top 3 solutions to the biggest challenge on the planet we face today. I definitely think that we will be forced, if we don't take the opportunity, to actually turn that into a business model, to actually sequester that carbon and to solve that issue. And as we all know, nature and climate are directly interlinked, especially in a sector like agriculture. So we can actually make sure that we solve the climate and nature crisis that we're going through if we are able to actually both provide the right laws. I mean, a level playing field with simply forbidding to doing the wrong thing there's nothing bad with it. That's a public good, and it's really good as long as it's the same rules for everyone in the system. And secondly, it then needs to be rewarding to do the right thing. Now, are we ready? I think many companies are not yet. If I talk about my own organization, nature is definitely seen after climate as the second biggest non-financial topic to be managed going forward. That's also why we look at it proactively. And I think there's an increasing number of large companies, but also companies with a very direct link to nature and biodiversity loss that see that is emerging. If you see how fast tnfd is picked up by large companies in comparison to TCFD, that awareness is growing. But I think, and it's growing very rapidly. But at the same time, also here I'm at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development gathering. You see that many companies look at it as an important topic, but they don't know yet in detail how to tackle it. And that is partly also because the measurement is still in its infancy. And the problem is much more complex, as I indicated, than climate. It's not 5 molecules the same throughout the world any time of the year. It's a more complicated issue to look at. So yes, it requires more knowledge. It especially requires more measurement, objective measurement that people can trust. And it requires the right laws and the right incentives. I am optimistic that that is going to shift fast. And of course, as a person, I'm always nervous that it will, even though it's fast, not be fast enough to solve the issue in time. But that's, I think that unites us all. That's why we're in this call.
Martin, allow me to compliment Bas a little bit.
Please go ahead.
All the points you mentioned are very valid. But my view is that it just requires action. action on the ground because of the complexity and the fact that it is, different to measure. We will figure it out on how we can aggregate these elements. But what is fascinating when we are advising companies as ICN teams, and we go and start embarking in the capitals journey or the natural capitals journey with the various companies, they always ask us, hey, tell us what our impacts and our dependencies are on nature. What's the measurement? What's the indicator? I said, let's start this journey differently. Can you take us to your sites, irrespective whatever site you have, and let's look at what's already happening out there and look at the opportunity that can actually be developed on these sites with your neighbors. And that suddenly we realize that very often a lot of actions are already taken. Stakeholder engagement is happening, and very often happening in a biodiverse way and in a way of integrating social elements in it, because it makes common sense, it makes business sense to actually do that. And effectively, suddenly you realize that there is a whole army of smaller actions, but if you actually put them together, they are a great catalog of all different types of actions that are actually happening within the various units, the various operations on the ground, that can be then put together into almost your biodiversity policy or strategy, and suddenly realize that this is not something new. This is something business has been doing, but hasn't been advertising or promoting in it such a way. Now, of course, and Renata highlighted this to it as well when she was asked the questions about the regulatory framework. Sometimes the regulatory frameworks in the countries are not conducive to this, and they are impeded in really helping protected areas to do exactly what they would be doing. And there was a tendency of keeping people away or business away from protected areas instead of looking at what kind of collaboration can be out there. But what I picked up from the recent open working group negotiations here in Geneva for the pre-COP CBD discussions is that national finance plans was the topic that was most advanced. It was very difficult to come up with a resource mobilization to the global level, but there was a clearly unanimous view on what needs to happen at the national level. Set up a national finance plan on biodiversity, making sure that we are working together towards these actions and that all finance sources need to be considered. So let's go back at the national level where the regulatory framework can then also be adapted. And let's see then how companies, small and large, can then contribute to what happens in these countries. And some of these countries have already done that very effectively, and others, they probably need to learn from some of their neighbors on how to do that. Again, that's also,
I like, Gerard, how you point at the opportunity that is there if you bring people to an actual site. And of course, to a country already is helpful, but it's at the site that you can get the inspiration on what is needed and what can you already do. And so I want to bring this to Renata, being part of the TNFD. And by the way, one of the questions in the chat was, are you linked to the TNFD? Well, Renata, Holcim, Rabobank, as well as Unilever, they're all related to the TNFD. And the Capitals Coalition is one of the knowledge partners. And the Natural Capital Protocol and its guidances were starting points for the TNFD work. But Renata, if you want to bring in your board and ensure that they have the right competencies, what is your experience in what works best? Is it to bring them to a site, or would it be to have the TNFD guidance already there and the need to implement them to show in the board papers what is the impact and the dependency on nature? So can you please come in on this?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both, to be honest, because if I think about Holcim's board, there is a key element about incentives, bonus incentives, which is approved by the board. And at Holcim, nature is part of these incentives. So we do have incentives for climate, we do have incentives for water and for circular economy. So we have targets, and if the senior managers reach these targets, they get the bonus. And this is approved by the board. However, we want to move a bit more, like, for example, having like biodiversity incentives, because in the nature is water that we're focused on. So I believe that for the board or for every employee to get a hands-on, so going to the site, I like the idea for Gerard, that what he said, go to the site, understand what are the risks, but really, what are the opportunities there? Because there are plenty of opportunities. I just visited a site, a quarry in Switzerland not long ago, like 3 weeks ago. And we saw a lot of opportunities to do, like, for example, green corridors in an area that we owned, and also it's owned by the government. So was just being there and talking to many stakeholders, because there were many stakeholders, including IUCN was there with us. And it was very interesting to see that being there, opportunities come. So it's not only risk, it's also about opportunities. But then when they are there, they know what we are talking about. So when they get the tnfd framework, they will understand straight away what this is about. So I think it would be a mix of them, but clearly, maybe first of all, go to the field, go to the sites and understand, and then second of all, check the paper, the theory behind it, because then you understand better.
Thanks for this, and I think it is a very fair answer to the question to make a choice between the two different things, of course. Getting the inspiration on site, as well as having the appropriate frameworks and measurement techniques behind it. Going to the next question, not the institutional level, but systemic level change. What is needed really is to change the way how we value success in our economy and in our businesses. So what is the kind of change that really will accelerate this? Is it nature positive regulation? Is it scaling nature positive finance? Is it societal demand for nature positive products and services? Is it reducing environmental harmful subsidies, the 1.8 trillion the world is spending annually? Is it nature positive government incentives? Is it scaling sustainability accounting? And it's having the nature positive finance and nature positive regulation going hand in hand on top so far. Melissa, bringing you in again, based on the supply chain experiences of Unilever, what would be your reaction to the systemic level changes that are needed? What would accelerate it the most?
All of them, but the one that springs to mind, I guess, in terms of our strategy is we have a €1 billion climate and nature fund, and we're at the start of that process, but it's a brand-led fund, so it's about brand value creation. So it's repurposed marketing spend. So instead of brands spending money on marketing, they're going to spend it on impact programs. So for example, kind of restoration or regeneration programs. And in order for that to happen, we kind of have to have the consumer insights, the societal demand. And we know that our consumers are asking for this. And so it's that kind of loop process of proving the consumer demand, aligning it to an implementation program with the right implementation partners, but the drive really is there from consumers, because at the end of the day, you know, we're a consumer-facing business. We sell stuff, and we serve our consumers, and the other people we serve are investors, and I think it's kind of a mix of that wider societal demand that really accelerates action.
Thank you. And it's good to see how the consumers, the ordinary people that buy products from companies like Unilever, are brought to the table by you, Melissa. So Bas, scaling nature positive finance is number one in the reactions from the audience. Can you step in, and do you agree finance is the most important system level change that is needed? And if so, bring it to the table.
I don't, and I'll explain why. Because of course, finance is a precondition to actually make things work. But to be honest, finance is the result of a societal demand. If there is societal demand, there will be finance, because the risk parameters will be good for regular finance. And even if there's too much risk involved in an early stage development, there will be risk capital available, because people see that there is a profit model as a result of that demand. So I'm not hiding. There is a big responsibility for the financial sector to actually make this work. That is clear, and we need to live up to it. I hope I gave some examples how we try to do that. But it is an indirect way of making things work. And I think the clear example that Melissa gave on how Unilever is taking its responsibility potentially is more impactful than just the precondition of having the money to then be the entrepreneur and to deliver it on the ground. I would say a combination of market forces, consumers asking for it, and regulation is the starting point to actually make these things work. And to be honest, I have a feeling, and that's also, I think, reflected in the work of Business for Nature, that the private forces currently are moving faster in the right direction than governments. And that is to some extent worrisome, because I would expect that the boundaries will be set in a public way based on democratic processes. And within that, we provide the market as a solution. And nowadays, it seems that that markets become more important than government. And I think for a public good like nature, being an ecologist, that's the wrong way around. But that's a personal observation.
Martin, if you're allowed, can I comment on what was mentioned about?
Yes, please jump in.
Yeah, no, because I had the opportunity to really prove the point that is mentioned, that business are being more ambitious than government on the pre-CBD negotiator in Geneva. I had the opportunity to be there in one of the negotiations panel. And I had the opportunity to speak up on behalf of Business for Nature and the business. And we are calling on the target 15. We are asking for mandatory assessment and disclosure for nature risks for companies and also financial institutions. And at the end of it, very interesting, a person from the Secretariat from CBD came to me, to the Business for Nature person that was with me, and said, Renata, thanks so much. You really made my day. You made one of my dreams come true today. And then I said, but why? Why you're saying this? And he said to me, because I was dreaming one day that business would be more ambitious than the government. And today you made the point. So congratulations. And the guy was from the CBD Secretariat. I cannot tell names, but then he came back to the main, to the stage and continued the discussions. But I really agree with Bas on his point, just to prove that I completely agree with him. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this story to the floor, Renata. And it indeed was a wonderful moment in the CBD negotiations. And it wasn't the first time that negotiators came to us as the business representatives and said, well, the ambition of the business community really is high and higher than that of many of the country negotiators. So you see business taking the lead more and more. Please, James, bring on the last question so we can come to a close of this panel. But if you were part of a new project similar like We Value Nature, with all the positive vibes that are behind us, with business being so active while at the same time calling for an enabling environment created by governments in different ways, what actions would you focus on? So after this meeting, what is the next step you're going to develop if you're part of a new project like We Value Nature? And while you're thinking about that, there's one question I want to go back on to you, Bas. I understand that you say finance is the result of a societal demand. At the same time, and this goes back to one of the questions also in the chat, we've seen, especially in the finance community, the recognition of the risk that is related to nature loss for financial portfolios, both at national levels, referring to reports done by the Dutch Central Bank and the French Central Bank, that about 40% of their portfolios in the financial sector in those countries are dependent on nature. So is it possible for the financial sector to wait on the societal demands in the light of these risks? Would be one of the questions I still have for you. Please come in.
No, not at all. We can't wait and we don't wait. So let me be very clear on that. You're totally right. These risks are material, and as a result, we need to act upon it. It is important, that was also mentioned in the chat, that we are able to quantify, to measure, in order to convince people that simply need that in order to do their work properly. But I myself know by heart the top 3 of how to actually avoid nature loss in our business. I don't need detailed measurement waiting for mechanisms in place. I mean, 50% of the nature impact of the agricultural sector comes from deforestation. And I think the top 2 related to climate are fertilizers and crop protection or pesticides, depending on which side of the debate you are. You use the different word, which is already strange. So I know what to work on, and we are working on that. And we try to lower the risk both for our clients and for us as a financial institution tackling those issues. But it is also true that if you want to tackle those issues, you need to work together. So clients, consumers, and the government are important players in that, what I would call, process, that inclusive process. We need to do it together, and we need to start yesterday. That is totally clear. And financial institutions are very often the place where these processes, these risks and opportunities come together. And that is why we are currently also looked upon at very much detail when taking our corporate responsibility on this topic, and I think for the right reasons. So yes, you are right, we cannot wait. I hope we do some practical work showing that we try to be part of the solution, and we would be helped a lot by other stakeholders, including government and consumers, to actually jointly make it happen.
Thank you for that, Bas. A clear top 3, collaboration, what is needed, and yes, the need to start yesterday being acknowledged. That's a perfect answer to also, I think, which relates to the question now on the slide where we see the results coming in from the audience. I now go to all of the panelists for just 2-3 words from each of you on what you think should be part of the new project similar to We Value Nature, using what's provided by the audience as inspiration. First, Melissa, what do you think would be a great winner for a new project like We Value Nature? 2-3 words.
I guess anything that drives alignment, and as I was saying, one common methodology. So keeping up the spirit and the large campaign, but anything that drives alignment would make me happy.
Alignment, that's a beautiful word. Thank you. Gerard, bringing you in, what would be your 1 or 2 words?
How do we make all the great elements that we've developed under We Value Nature really accessible to small businesses, because they are the ones that can really turn into nature positive business models, because they've got that agility and that focus that perhaps some larger groups have more difficulties.
Okay, we have alignment. Thank you, Melissa. Accessibility for SMEs. Thank you, Gerard. So is the 3rd word also starting with an A? That's the question to you, Renata.
Yes, I would say working in collective actions. Not only business need to be ambitious, governments need to set nature policies, nature positive policies, and we need to work with small companies, big companies, and also NGOs. So I would say collective actions is 2 words, but it's together.
Two words, and probably in another language it would be something like actions collectively, so that it still starts with an A. Bas, your final word to add to this. You already mentioned question 2.
I think, to be honest, I would come back to the triangle. I think there's a lot going on in the public sector, but too slow. There's a lot going on in the private sector, but very often not very visible. Consumers are not yet as aware as necessary. And I think we value nature could bridge the gap between those 3 key stakeholders in the process. All of the 3 individuals do their own thing, but bringing together, and that is alignment Renata, I think, also mentioned, but to some extent also Melissa. I think that is where there's additional impact to be made at a relatively efficient, in a relatively efficient way.
Thank you very much, Bas. So now I have 2 A's and 2 C's: alignment, accessibility, collective action, collaboration, and connection between all of the different actors. So thanks all the panelists for joining us today. And back to you, Guy.
Very many thanks, Martin, and many thanks indeed to Melissa, Renata, Bas, and Gerard for providing that panel, and all the audience for all the responses to the Menti questions. Very enlightening, and we'll be examining all of that as we move forward to providing some final recommendations to the Commission. And now, in fact, we are moving to our participants, our speakers from the European Commission and the European Investment Bank, and very happy to have them with us. And we're going to put them a little bit on the spot here, because we want very much to hear what they're doing in this regard, what they're doing about accelerating the transition to nature positive, and also have some reaction from them to what they have heard from the community in the previous session. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask each of our speakers to give us a brief statement on what initiatives they have in process, and what financial instruments they are bringing to bear on this challenge. So 2 to 3 minutes each on that, and then we'll ask them in a second round to provide some reaction to what they've been hearing. So we're going to start off with Stefan Leiner, who's head of unit for natural capital and ecosystem health in DG Environment. Stefan, great to have you with us. Can you give us a quick take on what you're up to in the policy sphere?
Thank you very much, Guy, and hello to everybody. It's really a great pleasure to be at this very interesting event, and we will certainly take very well notes of the recommendations that will come up for the very successful We Value Nature project. So thanks for that. Now, someone mentioned that you need government commitments. Well, I can assure you that the European Commission is very committed. It has outlined its commitments in the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. And there is a whole chapter on creating the enabling framework in order to make sure that we actually become nature positive by 2030. And in that, there is also a strong event or focus made on the role that business are playing, that biodiversity considerations have to be taken into account in business decision, and that businesses play a very important role in achieving the objectives of halting and reversing biodiversity loss by 2030. So there is a range of actions that are outlined there, and we are very busy in implementing them. It was already mentioned, the CBD COP. I hope you have all noticed that the EU position is very much, I think, in line with the Business for Nature position and others. And we certainly welcome that this emphasis on becoming nature positive to be embedded in the global biodiversity framework that is now being negotiated. The issue of measuring, valuing, and disclosing the impacts and dependencies of businesses and financial institutions are, we think, really key in order to enable the transition that is needed towards a nature-positive economy and a nature-positive society and a nature-positive world, actually. And we have a number of projects that are ongoing, also addressing some of the issues that were mentioned, that we need better tools, better matrices, better methodologies. One of them is a project funded by the Life Fund, which is called Transparent, and another also from the Life Fund, which is called the Line. And they aim to develop commonly accepted methodologies and guidance for the measurement and valuation of companies' impacts and dependencies on the environment, including biodiversity. Some said we need to develop nature-positive regulations. Well, there is a number that are already being proposed or in the pipeline. I think a very important one is the proposed directive on corporate sustainable reporting that aims to strengthen and improve companies' reporting on their impacts on the environment, including biodiversity and resulting risks. So this will hopefully help investors, consumers, policymakers, and other stakeholders to evaluate particularly large companies' sustainability performance. The taxonomy regulation is another piece of legislation that is very important here, and that is designed to help companies and investors to identify climate and environmentally sustainable activities, to invest in action to avoid greenwashing, to signal to real economy companies what constitutes a substantial contribution to achieving our environmental policy objectives, and all that without causing significant harm to any of the environmental objectives. And here there is work going on after that already the climate dimension has been tackled, to now also look at wider environmental policy objectives, including biodiversity, and that will hopefully set a frame, also helping investors to invest in biodiversity-friendly investments. Our EU Business and Biodiversity platform is working on many of the issues we are discussing together to really create alliances between businesses and other stakeholders, including ourselves. And we are in this platform working on natural capital accounting and in particular methods for corporates, biodiversity impact measurement, also building upon those projects that I mentioned. It has a growing membership, well over 400. And I invite those of you who are at this event who have not yet joined the platform to do it, because there is a lot of work happening that is very much related to the topic we are discussing together. So to end, the We Value Nature project has been certainly very useful in supporting and guiding companies to take up natural capital thinking. And I fully agree that this type of work needs to be scaled up, and we'll have to see what will be the best instruments we have available in the Commission to continue supporting such work. And I'll leave it to that and look forward to discussing further in the panel.
Very many thanks, Stefan. Thanks a lot. And we'll come back to you for maybe a few more reactions on what you've heard in the panel. We'll move on now to Marco. Marco Fritz is a Deputy Head of Unit in DG Research, the unit responsible for climate and planetary boundaries. So just a small topic. Marco, you've got a lot on your plate. Can you give us a short statement on how Horizon Europe will be helping to accelerate the transition to nature positive?
Thank you, Guy. Good morning still to all of the colleagues here. I would first want to say that, and echo what Stefan has said, that we believe that value nature, as it is very soon ending, and it has a very engaged, if a large business community, as we say here, and promoted the success of the standards of the natural capital protocol. The network is built, the number of training on informative material it has done, and the business it has trained, all of this is fair. And then I go back to the open question which you put at the last point of the last session, and we come back to it in the second intervention. But there is one thing is, I think, what the value nature could do and should do now in the last point of part of its action, and very confident that it will do this, is to make indeed this material accessible also to the business of biodiversity platform. I think this is something that we want to see, that the material is accessible for the other products. On what we do on building on the value nature, you know that we have put at the same time 2 projects into place. One was called Maya, that was on natural capital accounting for governance, for the governments, and the value nature for natural capital accounting for businesses. So both of them have worked very well together. So we have seen that they were very much aligned, and they have very mutually kind of steered each other. That was what we have done in Horizon 2020. Now, since 2021, we have a new framework program on research, and where we have put a number of opportunities for research organizations, including businesses, which is very clearly in the strategic plan for Horizon Europe, that we want to engage further businesses for finding solutions to be adopted, and to be demonstrated, to be put on the market on natural capital accounting. So we need all this further knowledge, research, information, engagement from the stakeholders to go on. What we do here is we will not finance at this moment a V-value nature 2, because we think one of the part of V-value nature is also to explore what can be options of a longer term initiative beyond the end of the project. It was part of the task we gave to V-value nature, but we have, and I'm very confident that we will see some of the people here and in the V-value nature consortium in projects which we have put where we have put the topics on in the work program, and I will just go through 4 of them, which we have put in the work program 2021. And these topics have been put out for applications, and the application period is closed. We are at this very moment in the evaluation, and this evaluation will finish very soon. So we try to get the grant agreement with these projects still in April. So we will have these kind of projects already possibly starting this July, which will give a new impetus on these things. And I give you a few of them. One is a project on ecosystem and their services for an evidence-based policy and decision-making. So that is a very clear links to what, for example, the Environment Initiative has done with Mars for mapping and assessment of ecosystem and the services. And of course, there is so well, we have the private, or we have agriculture, but we have heard element there in as well. We have done the same thing as well, in particular for coastal and marine biodiversity, but we know there's a big gap on how to assess and how to these ecosystems and their services. Then we have put a specific topic on natural capital accounting in relation to the measuring of biodiversity footprint of products and organizations. And I think that what I hear seems to be very relevant for the work which we colleagues have here said here. So that is a second project. The third one is looking at policy mixes, governance and decision tools, and monitoring tools. So all what we have said that we have heard in the last parts for the transformative change for biodiversity. And where, of course, we know, based on the IPBES assessments and from further issues, that businesses, the governance, the financing is one of the key factors which can drive these transitions. So that is another. That was another project, and that explicitly should go beyond the natural capital accounting. So that is already done here. So we want that one go beyond this. And the last one is very clearly a project which is fine-tuned to look what is the impact and the dependency of businesses on biodiversity, from biodiversity. And that is, again, we had this question where this topic should then clearly and directly feed into the IPBES assessment on business and biodiversity, which is at this very moment also happening, which will give its possibly we expect that the assessment will be done in 2025, if I'm not mistaken, 2025. when it will come out. So we have put this kind of range of possibilities there. And we continue with the portfolio of nature-based solution projects. So we've seen that nature-based solutions are one of these tools which can put businesses to a nature positive economy. We have at this moment 32 projects running, and we will have another series of nature-based solutions running, which do work on what we have still there, the knowledge gaps. And this will come in the work program 23-24, which is at this very moment in preparation by the Commission. We expect that there will be a wider consultation in summer on this, so that we have in 22 already the work program 23-24 published. Thank you.
Very many thanks, Marco, and good to hear about those topics coming through into projects very quickly in the early summer, and that there's more coming in the next work program 23-24. And again, we'll come back to you in a couple of minutes for a few more reflections. Moving on to our third speaker. So Eva Mayerhofer is the lead environment and biodiversity specialist at the European Investment Bank. And Eva, we'd like to hear from you about what debt and equity financing and other instruments the EIB may be bringing to the table for this transition.
Thank you, Guy. I'll take it a little bit, or I'll approach it slightly differently. At first, I want to start by saying I concur a lot with the statements that Bas made, because they resonate very much with us as a financing institution, although we are different in nature and we are a multilateral development bank also. And so prior to COP26, the G7 and the G20 called on the community of multilateral development banks to really make their commitments towards a nature positive trajectory more explicit. And that ended up in this joint statement that was signed at COP26, where we acknowledged that progress on global sustainable development, climate and biodiversity goals cannot be achieved without addressing the direct and indirect drivers of nature loss, transforming the way we value, in which we value, use, conserve and share the benefits from nature. So that's the overarching heading. But what does that actually mean? So first is, of course, maintaining the thought leadership in the development of safeguards for biodiversity and ecosystems. And in the revision of our standards, actually, we have moved away from a no net loss of biodiversity in our operations to a no loss of biodiversity, which means that we are refocusing more on avoidance, mitigation based on science and restoration. And we've moved away from offsets, and offsets are no longer a measure that we can be, that are used in our operations to achieve a net positive impact. We've also looked, and there were discussions on the supply chain. So we've enhanced our due diligence in the supply chain, especially where there are significant impacts on high biodiversity value or on deforestation, so that we bring also in terms of our risk framework, these aspects are considered in the decision-making process. The second point, and I think this is where there's an interest from the group, is looking at fostering nature positive investments. So looking at developing projects, business models, financing instruments to support that economic activity. And that has been a lot more challenging, let's say, in the EU compared to our operations outside of the EU. So the toolbox of financial instruments that we have are geared towards financing, of course, more large infrastructure types of projects, geared to a well-regulated environment, such as the regulated environment in the EU. They are not geared to operations outside of the EU or within a developing country context, where a lot of the nature, the biodiversity is managed and sustained by communities, indigenous communities, traditional communities, and therefore we are looking at adapting that toolbox. And Guy, you mentioned in your introductory statements blended finance, looking at how blended finance needs to be also adapted to developing country context and channeling the financing more towards communities rather than to larger infrastructure projects or larger clients. So that ensuring that they have then the financing needed to maintain and manage those ecosystems and biodiversity, all the while maintaining their livelihoods. But it would also require us to define what nature positive is. And this is and have this operational definition, and we are and try to build an understanding of the financial risk posed by nature loss. So redirect those financial flows away from the business as usual models. So we are looking also at because we have targets. We have a 50% target of climate action and environmental sustainability by 2025. It's also understanding how can we make sure that also our climate action projects are nature positive. To date, let's say most of 90% of our climate action projects don't have any significant harm on nature, but they don't have that positive aspect. So we are trying to redefine the co-benefits of these climate action projects and also have that operational definition of nature positive. And we should be having that those definitions, an MDB joint definition of nature positive by end of June, at least a first draft. But what something that we've been looking at, I mean, as you well know, since 2020, all our projects need to be Paris aligned, including now since 2021, we have a Paris alignment framework for our counterparties. And in order for us to be really, truly nature positive in terms of our trajectory, we need to start looking at the energy transition plans or these net zero transition plans of our counterparties to make sure that they do integrate or have a nature positive trajectory in those plans. Very often, the ones that we have recently looked at don't consider nature at all. Do not or it's not very explicit. They still talk about offsets, and offsets that in effect just move the damage to biodiversity from one region to another region. And therefore, we are seeing that actually these energy transition plans are eating into a nature positive trajectory. So we need to take that important step to make sure that there is a combination of a net zero plus a nature positive trajectory in those plans. Very challenging, we have to say, because that means also a shift in thinking from our climate colleagues, which they to date have not thought about nature positive in their approach to the Paris alignment framework. Then also what we've been looking at, and I think Bas mentioned that in his comments, is the financial risk of biodiversity, and not only at portfolio level, but we work on projects. We are a project financing institution, and is looking at then also all our counterparts. And integrating that biodiversity risk into our risk assessment. So here we are working actually with the credit risk agencies, because they have developed a certain amount of models. We are looking at seeing whether our climate risk model and score can be expanded to look at biodiversity and environment in general, because I think, as was mentioned, biodiversity is not the only risk, but we are looking at water risk also, and two other types of risks in that risk framework. And then finally, in terms of valuation, we've been working now, it's been nearly 4 years that we are developing transfer values for our external biodiversity and ecosystem externalities to be integrated into our economic appraisal. We are one of the few financial institutions that actually do an economic appraisal for all our operations and projects, and it's those transfer values, finding the right proxies where we can't identify those transfer values and integrating those into our decision-making process. I'll stop there and hand over back to you.
Thanks a lot, Eva, and very fascinating to hear all the aspects of how you're moving towards nature positive. We want to run one final Menti question to engage our participants once more. What would you most value in terms of advances in the EU policy framework and/or EU financing for nature positive? So please put your thinking hats on. Here's your chance to put your ask to both the Commission and the European Investment Bank. And while we are seeing those come in, I'd like to ask Stefan first. Was there anything in particular in the panel session that struck you that you would like to react to? Any of the barriers that were highlighted, the next steps that companies are making, the institutional level changes, the systemic level changes, anything that particularly struck you?
Yes, I mean, there was this strong call for nature positive regulation, and it would be interesting for me to know more specifically, in addition to what is already out there and what is in the pipeline, what is more needed as regulation from the EU perspective. Because, I mean, we have the nature legislation, we have other types of environment legislation, we have quite a strict regime, I would say, in the EU. We have in the pipeline the when I hear Bas, who mentioned the two main problems being deforestation and pesticides, there is already a proposal from the Commission to deal with deforestation that is now being discussed in the Parliament and the Council, that obliges anybody who puts certain commodities that are the main drivers for deforestation globally on the market, like soya, oil palm, etc., to respect due diligence provisions to make sure that those are not coming from an area that was previously forest, for example, or that it was coming from a degraded forest. We have the nature package that was supposed to be adopted on the 23rd of March, but due to the Ukraine crisis, the Commission had to adopt very quickly some other decisions, and therefore we needed to get another slot in the system, which is now in June. But the legislations are ready, one of them being the sustainable use regulation of pesticides regulation, so addressing, making it the farm to fork objective to reduce pesticides by 50% by 2030, a legally binding objective, and also having all the framework to make that legally binding, and a nature restoration law, which also should have very concrete legal obligation to restore nature, for example, to re-wet and restore those wetlands that are under agricultural use at the moment. So there is a lot already happening. There is a lot in the pipeline. I mentioned taxonomy, I mentioned sustainable reporting. There are proposals also to work on the green claims, to avoid greenwashing, etc. All of that, is there still something missing in the regulatory framework we have in the EU when you take all this into account? When you mentioned you need more nature positive regulation, that is, I think, for me, a clear question. I also have seen that there is this question of perverse subsidies, and there are questions in the chat on, for example, agriculture. I mean, that is obviously a very difficult topic, and we see it even now in the discussions when we look at the CAP reform, that every time the Commission proposes some very ambitious greening objectives, they are watered down in the discussions in the Parliament and in the Council. So I would say we are not there yet, that there is a recognition in all sectors, including in the agriculture sector, that we need to embark full speed in this transition, in this transformational change that IPEX is called about, away from an agriculture that is based on heavy inputs, on intensification, etc., towards a nature positive type of agriculture. And we see it now with the Ukraine war, that this idea that we might get into a food security problem, and even small advances are now being rolled back, or they are precious to do that. So I think there is still a lot to be done, that we get away from these, but the objective and the direction is very clear with the new CAP that is moving towards supporting more investments and type of agriculture that is nature positive. I think that train is moving along. When it comes to other harmful subsidies, well, that is a difficult topic, and there is also, I think, a limit into what can be done at European level. There's a lot at the end. This will depend on what municipalities, on what regional governments, and on what national governments decide on what they want to invest into and what they don't want to invest anymore.
Many thanks, Stefan. And I guess in answer to your question about what further regulation, there's quite a number of suggestions coming up in the Menti responses here. We won't have time to go through all of those, but we can obviously pass them on to you. I guess one that would occur to me would be something equivalent to the ETS. We have, we expect companies to offset their emissions to help us get to net zero. Should we have some kind of equivalent of expecting companies to offset damage to nature to get us to nature positive? So that would obviously require a level playing field, but it's too much to get into that discussion right now. I want to move on to Marco Fritz. And Marco, was there anything particular in the previous panel session that struck your mind and that you'd like to pick up on?
Yes, thank you. I think one of the issues is the taxonomy. There is I think I want to put on here into the discussion is, it is not, we don't need always to go to the word nature biodiversity to find nature biodiversity positive issues. So if you go to the EU taxonomy, which has been made on climate adaptation, where we have nature-based solutions involved and included in there with the definition of the EU, which is for biodiversity as well. So we have something in climate policies which is biodiversity friendly, and that is relevant to go to more and more in the future. So there you see part of the framework which the Commission can do. I would like to go back to one of the issues which was said as well as the barriers before, and or what would be the next actions to do for getting businesses more positive. I think part of it is what we have heard, the accessibility and the common way of working together of projects. And that is something we can do here in the research and innovation community. So what we have done is we have asked the projects working on nature-based solutions, working on insurance. We have projects with insurance companies to look at the risk which is done by natural disasters and how this can lead to another way of making insurances business model happen. And we have projects on natural capital accounting, etc. That we have asked them to put all of them together, to put task forces together of a portfolio of projects. And one of the outcomes you see in the chat, which my colleague Julie has put, is this white paper on what could be a nature positive economy. There will be a publication coming out very soon as well, which is led by 14 projects, and the value nature is included in there, which will publish this common publication on potential new value chains and market opportunities of NBS. And this is something which we try to put more and more into place, that we have a kind of a mandate of a portfolio of projects, and what these projects, not only one, but all of them together, will suggest that we can much easier put into and suggest as a kind of a de facto European way of working. I wouldn't go so far as a standard, that is another issue, but if we have from all the different research communities a kind of a common approach where we want to go to, this is certainly something that we will invest in the future. So I leave it with that one. Thank you.
Very many thanks, Marco. And we're running quite short of time, but a couple of minutes also to Eva, please, to give any quick take you'd like to make on what you heard in the previous panel session, anything that particularly struck you. And there's also a quick question in the chat asking what is wrong with offsets.
On offsets, I think it's a part of a contentious discussion, and just very briefly, it's associated also, especially outside of the EU, with land rights and human rights. So offsets generally very contentious. I think that's one reason why no agreement was reached at COP26 on nature-based solutions, because also the indigenous communities, traditional communities, were not heard or not adequately, couldn't come to an agreement with other parties. So, but I'm happy to take that offline, Johan, and discuss the issues around offsets. But from what I heard, I think one of the problems that we've been facing, I mean, and we are more than ready to finance nature-based solutions and nature-positive projects. But when we include all the requirements as spelled out, for example, in our standards on biodiversity, that a corporate and even a corporate that has all the policies in place, they may not disagree, or they will push back on all the extra requirements, the extra monitoring, the extra reporting, and they will say thank you, but no thank you to the loan. And because there is so much, there is an availability of cheap financing through other commercial banks, that they don't see, you know, the added value of having all these additional requirements imposed on them. And therefore will not take the loan. And we've been seeing, especially from large corporates, that pushback. So it's very difficult to strike a balance between the requirements, even the regulatory requirements, and we've committed to the EU taxonomy and the do no significant harm. A lot of the criteria under do no significant harm go beyond EU legislation, and they say, well, it's not captured in EU legislation. We are not, it's you want to consider it green, we don't want to consider it green, and therefore we are under no obligation. So, so there are these tensions on the ground, even if they have all the nice policies in place. So this is something that we've been finding increasingly.
Many thanks, Eva. And thanks then to Eva, Stefan and Marco for joining us for this panel, and very valuable for us to hear your views on what's happening and what the policy initiatives and financing initiatives are. We look forward to continuing that conversation with you. I'm going to hand over now to Martin for a couple of minutes of final wrap up. Martin.
Thank you very much, Guy, and all of the colleagues from the EU for sharing your insights on opportunities for next steps. A couple of minutes to close, although the clock probably will be heard here quite soon, stating the 12th hour. But first of all, thanks to Guy and the team of We Value Nature. You've done a wonderful job over the last 3.5 years to reach out to the submerged part of the iceberg. And I think this concept of the submerged part of the iceberg and the need to reach all those that are there really is a good way to phrase it. And what we've heard from several of the speakers today, if not all, was that if we really want to do that, the first thing is to be positive, to be nature positive, focus on the opportunities. Don't forget about the risk, but it's the opportunities that make hearts tick a little bit faster. The steps forward align very well with the 3-year strategy we have in place as Capitals Coalition. I think that there's a clear call to standardize both the metrics as well as the targets that we are aiming for, so consolidate our direction, to build capacity and enable, especially SMEs, to bridge the knowledge gap, the skills gap that's there, and also to advocate collectively for an enabling environment that will help all people forward. So the enabling environment being the rules and the incentives, or to phrase Roosevelt, the sticks and the carrots, they need to be there. And then we heard from the Commission in several ways how they are wanting to build on the outcomes so far, but also to continue those. The agreement to scale up, I heard quite clearly, Stefan. I think that's great, and also the opportunities in the context of New Horizon projects that were shared by Marco, and the way how EIB is investing in nature too. The New Horizon opportunities. As Capitals Coalition, we are part of many of the proposals that are already on the table or that will be soon on the table. And it's great to see how we can build on this together with our broader community. We will be part of those next steps too. Then of course, there were also some cautious about watering down the ambitions, either in the CBD negotiations or in the reforms of incentives like the Common Agricultural process. And so my last remark is in relation to this watering down potential risk. We always see that there's a kind of the iceberg is in all sectors too. So there's a small top on the top of all sectors, being the private sector or the government sector, that is really in favor of change, the front runners, but there's also a big group following or lagging behind, depending on where they are. And if we really want to prevent watering down, what we need to do and what we need to set up is a radical collaboration of the front runners in all sectors, business, finance, and policy together, in order to take away the barriers and to prevent watering down our ambition and our opportunities. So with that, I hope that we value nature too. The sequel might be there. It might look totally different, but I think the support is here, both from the private sector speakers as well as the EU. Thank you all, and handing over to you, Guy, for the final words, if necessary. If not, we can conclude this.
Thanks very much, Martin. Thanks so much for joining us today. And we're really happy that the Coalition, of course, will be taking forward a lot of the legacy of We Value Nature, as indeed will our various consortium partners and others. Very many thanks to all of our speakers today for giving your time so freely. And thank you also, of course, to all of our participants. And a final thanks to the We Value Nature team for all the work they have done over the last 3.5 years, which has been truly a privilege to be a part of that team. And we will be running through to the end of the month, of course, to provide our final outputs. And we look forward to continuing collaborating through further ventures with all of you. Thanks so much for joining us, and goodbye.